we're going to kick off the afternoon portion. I'm really thrilled at a time when the House is in recess this week and folks are back in district. Our friend Congressman Bill Foster flew in today because he wanted to make sure he had a chance to speak with us at this event. I think a lot of you have gotten to know him over the years. He's emerged, I think, as one of the, I'll say, the greatest champion in terms of talking about why we should be prioritizing digital identity in the U.S. And so we thought what we would do today is, I guess, a fireside chat, sort of talking about where things are and where we go from here.
When we finish your questions, we can, if the audience has follow on, we can do that.
Yeah. So let me sort of kick off from the start. You have been, without question, the most vocal advocate in Congress when it comes to the need for the U.S. to up its game when it comes to digital identity. You've led hearings. You drove the introduction of bipartisan legislation that tried to jumpstart activity. Why is it you're so passionate about this issue?
Well, yeah, I come at many ways. Part of it is just if you've ever put up with your spouse as he or she has spent the afternoon, on hold because someone's stolen their numbers for their credit cards and you're refreshing all your credit cards, then you just look at the amount of human, we only have so much time on Earth. And spending that time trying to clear up identity fraud problems is just not an acceptable use for any fraction of it. That's one of the drivers. I'm frustrated as a Democrat who cares deeply about, federal benefit programs for the less fortunate. There's a very powerful narrative that these are all fraud. And that gets fixed when we have a secure and reliable way of authenticating yourself. So the whole welfare queen narrative can be defeated that way. And there's, the national security aspects, which are real. There's, you're familiar with the long list of these, and I'm right now in the process, and have been for probably 5 years, trying to find out which arguments work with different segments of the Congress. Because and I think things are converging. There's all these new pressures coming in. There's the deep fake impersonations, to which the only answer is a secure digital identity presented on trusted electronics. There's, the long list, a huge amount of COVID identity fraud is a huge driver. The Doge crowd, if they're actually serious about government waste and fraud, guess what? There's probably hundreds of billions of dollars of preventable fraud. And so this is, why I'm passionate about it. It's going to make life better. There's an interesting, I'm also on the AI task force. And so we had a delegation from the Polish parliament come in and talk to us. And so in Poland, as you may be aware, they just voted out they had a Trumpy government and they voted them out because people were pissed about inflation, but that tells you how random this whole thing is. But anyway, but then when the delegation came in, there were 8 people from the new government teasing the one person to hold over from the old government. And they said the only popular thing that the old government in the Trumpy government did was set up a national identity app. And that is just, taken Poland by storm, apparently. Everyone's using it for all these different things. And it's really been very widely adopted. And so if I can convince the Doge crowd and people associated with that it's going to be politically not only acceptable, but well-loved, that's one of the angles I'm trying to work, as well as being a legitimate way to say that you just save hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money.
So why do you think it's been so hard to get Congress or the White House to act over the last few years on this topic?
Well, politicians, there are 2 different mindsets on this. There are 2 different sources of fear. Among Democrats, the big fear is J. Edgar Hoover. All right, that the government will go and spy on people and blackmail you and just do all the bad things that J. Edgar Hoover probably did. And so that is sort of the Democratic fear that, oh my gosh, the government will find out about my mistress and I'll get blackmailed or, whatever it is. And having to do with social issues and that kind of privacy. On the Republican side, most Republicans come from rural areas that have a very large informal economy. Like for years, my wife and I bought firewood from some people who came up in a truck from Arkansas and always demanded payment in cash. I'm pretty confident they didn't pay taxes on that. And so this is very often when a Republican says, I care about privacy, in the back of their mind, they're talking about tax avoidance. Okay, and so just, that's real, and you have to steer around that association in their mind. They never say it that way, but it's real. That's, for example, the reason for so much new enthusiasm about crypto. It's a similar thing. Their dream is that you'll have an online equivalent of the paying cash to the firewood vendors. So that's part of it. But interestingly, for very different reasons, both, sort of the ACLU wing and the Red Dawn people, if you know what I'm talking about, have sort of stood down for different reasons on this. And the ACLU, I encourage you to read a report from a little more than a year ago from the ACLU, where it started out with, oh my God, here's the appeal to our donors, and we're the only defense against the surveillance state. But if you read the last two sentences of their report, it says, but if this is done well, it will be good for privacy and good for equity, which is in fact true. And it's a complicated set of arguments that get you there, but you can, someone, an ACLU mindset person who reads that report will end up on the right side of this argument, as well as, being able to more adequately defend the social programs that ACLU types tend to. On the right, it's very different. They're all about voter fraud. Okay, and there are, very famous members of the Republican, the fringe of the Republican Party, giving speeches on the floor of the House, talking about we need a national database of who's allowed to register to vote where. Okay, they've just invented a national ID card or something equivalent to that. And so I think that people understand that. Another reason I'm passionate about it is that we actually get that established. Not allowing you to vote online, which I don't believe in. I think that's very dangerous. But allowing you to walk into any polling booth and show any polling location, get out your phone, and prove that you are a resident of this area and only this area, and have same-day voting rights. That will actually prevent what, as a Democrat, I think is a much bigger problem, which is suppression of voting through artificial things. So that if the deal that is struck with, okay, we are going to have mandatory voting, mandatory ID for voting nationwide, we are also going to have the mandatory right to present your digital ID and vote that same day, secure in the knowledge that you can do that in one and only one location in the United States. And so I think that there are deals to be struck here that actually satisfy everyone's main concerns.
Thanks. I mean, the voter ID one, we could, spend a lot of time going down that
I'm
rabbit
not
hole.
leading with that right now,
No,
but I'm sort of lurking in the weeds and occasionally bringing it up when it becomes relevant.
Well, I think it's an important issue. I mean, we already saw, I think, what was it? President Trump last week talked about withholding aid to California with the wildfires unless they impose a voter ID law. So it's very much front and center. I think the issue with Democrats, that have flagged over the years is, to your point, of voter suppression. If you have a voter ID requirement and it's hard to get ID, then how do those two things line up?
Yeah, and it used to be related to the digital divide argument. Back when only 60% of the US had a cell phone, I think we're above 95% right now. And when I go to food pantries in my district, there's usually a stack of contributed cell phones because people wanted to upgrade their iPhone without feeling guilty, so they gave it to the food pantry, and they have more than they can use. So that there's no reason why anyone in this country cannot have access to a cell phone. They may not have a cell phone contract, but they can go into a library or a McDonald's or wherever and get Wi-Fi access and use all the benefits of having a digital identification.
So 2025, awesome time to be a Democrat in Washington. You guys are obviously in the minority in the House, and also, you are a Democrat who likes to get things done. At a time when Republicans have unified control of government, where, if at all, do you see opportunities to make progress on digital ID this year?
Well, there are two areas I hope to make a beachhead. I'm the lead Democrat on the subcommittee with oversight of all banking and financial institutions. The lead Republican on the Financial Services Committee is French Hill, a man that I have very good working relationships with. And what I'm hoping I can convince him to do is to help set up a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox, where the basic deal is that if you are a small bank or a fintech or even a big bank that wants to onboard a customer for a low valued account, low transaction limit account, that you can do so with a mobile ID and a check with FinCEN or someone to make sure that whoever presented that ID is not on a blacklist. And so that if, that's something where you onboarding a customer can be done safely in 45 seconds. When that eventually that sandbox, if it were to expand to scale, you also need to handle the very delicate thing of who maintains the whitelist and the blacklist of customers. You can bypass that for a sandbox. If there's some, $10,000 transaction limit account that you can establish this way, and you're denied for some illegitimate reason, you're erroneously put on the blacklist, then it's not that big a deal. So we could get started there. And then there are two things, that sort of regulatory sandbox where KYC will be, something you can do with a mobile ID. Then there are a few essential federal roles. One thing we have to do is we have to knock heads with all of the different states to make sure they're all fully Real ID compliant. We have to make sure that, it's not possible to get one ID in Wyoming and another one in Illinois. And that's a solvable problem. We have to, I hope that all we have to do is tell AMVA that whatever they're doing on a voluntary basis has to be maintained, has to be made mandatory. There's another federal role that's broader than just digital ID, which is we need some agency somewhere that calls balls and strikes on trusted electronics. Because we're all talking about using a cell phone and the secure key storage there as sort of a biometric security dongle. Okay, that only works if you can trust the electronics. And if you look at black hat hacker conferences from a few years ago, you can see these presentations by gleeful German graduate students saying, "Oh, here is how I extract my private keys from my iPhone 6." Okay, and now it's widely believed that it's impossible to do that with modern iPhones, but who's going to call the balls and strikes on that? NIST will set standards for what it means to be a clean thing, and they're very happy to do that. But you also separately need some agency somewhere that says this iPhone is good enough, and this one, which Apple is hoping to roll out this Christmas, is in fact not good enough because you can extract the private keys from it, and therefore you can roll it out on Christmas, but you cannot advertise it as something you can present a mobile ID on. And so this will end up being a very high consequence agency, and we need to start setting it up now. And not just for iPhones, for just trusted electronics of any kind. When you go through National Airport, the TSA thing, we promise that we're going to throw away this picture we just took of you in 24 hours or whatever it is. Okay, who is it that has checked to make sure that's actually correct? And so, and it's got to be a federal agency or a delegate of a federal agency. And so that is a bigger problem than mobile ID, but we may end up having to deal with that early. I'd be very interested to see how the EU is handling that. Within sometime around the end of this year, or maybe a little bit later, every EU citizen will have the right to have an EU citizenship app. And they're going to have to solve the problem of which phones can it be presented on and which are just not good enough. That's going to get very political very fast because Apple has a very well-controlled production chain. Android ecosystem is it's a mess. Well, it's very broadly held. I think the crucial thing is that there are not that many chipsets that people are putting into cell phones. And the real control point is you have to have the trusted electronics in the cell phone chipset. Anyway, this sort of issue is going to come up again in the control of desktop biosynthesis devices, things that allow you to reproduce the smallpox genome on your desktop. You're going to want some trusted electronics monitoring that, and so setting up this infrastructure, I think, will be useful there too.
Thanks. You mentioned this before, and I wanted to take a moment both to highlight work you led a couple of years ago in the Chips and Science Act, and also thank you for it, because as part of the NIST reauthorization that was in the Chips and Science Act, there was language that said, in addition to the other things NIST does in identity, you should also look to develop guidance and best practices on digital identity validation and attribute validation services. Out of that, NIST has launched a big project at the NCCOE, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, focused on trying to couple up with, essentially a reference implementation and best practices for mobile driver's licenses as they're emerging, specifically focused on financial services. And, to the, point of, there actually is big interest in this. And if you set these things up, the industry is looking to participate. 7 financial institutions, 5 of them Better Identity Coalition members: JP Morgan Chase, PNC, US Bank, Wells Fargo, and Capital One along with Raymond James and Synchrony, are partnering with NIST there on this. And the most recent executive order that just came out, like the 3 days before the Biden administration ended, specifically told NIST, oh yeah, you should get this guidance out within 270 days. We'll see if that holds. It has not been revoked yet. So one, just wanted to thank you for that, because it was, great example of how adding 2 sentences to a bill that somebody may not read actually has a major impact in advancing things. To your point before about the regulatory sandbox, one of the things that we are hearing from some of our member banks is that their compliance teams aren't fully comfortable that they will be able to use these digital IDs for KYC process, which, how will I say it? When I talk to regulators off the record, they say, well, that's absurd. It's all risk-based. They can do whatever they want. But there are some ambiguities in the language that might need some clarification. Do you think, particularly if the industry, financial services industry, comes to the Hill on this, asking for a little bit of formal clarification, there's appetite on the Hill to try and push regulators on this issue?
Well, I have decided that the promising way to start that is with a regulatory sandbox. To just say, this is, to lower the stakes of this thing, just say, okay, establish, some maximum size account that you can open that will be, potentially pretty small, but will allow you to exercise all these, identify the problems, things like, which electronics can be trusted and which cannot, to present mobile IDs. If it becomes, even the sandbox becomes popular, then you'll have leverage on the states to actually become Real ID compliant and to issue digital driver's licenses that meet NIST specs.
I want to turn to another topic that you've been engaged on quite a bit, which is cryptocurrency. And, it's been interesting after the last 2 years being, I think, what folks were calling crypto winter. It's apparently hot crypto summer again. And I came up with that one myself. Do you think there's room, as this is happening, to talk about KYC and digital identity challenges in this environment? Or are you expecting the new regulatory regime that we're seeing to be, taking more of a laissez-faire approach? And, if there is room, where do you think there's an appetite to focus?
Well, I am separating those discussions. I think, if I was in charge of everything, I would have mandatory KYC of crypto wallets. And that would be, and that, that's a way to know that whatever crypto asset you're dealing with has not been touched by criminals. And again, because of the sort of selective reveal, all you have to know is that your crypto asset that you're being offered as payment has a continuous chain of possession among licensed participants who have clean bills of health from FinCEN or whatever. And so that allows you to accept that digital object in payment without worrying that that you're just enabling criminal activity. I don't anticipate there'll be much appetite for that. But on the other hand, there may be a possibility for a sandbox type approach. Like if you look at why the NFT market just collapsed, it was because there was nothing but wash trades. It was like 95% wash trades. I think even Melania got caught and she issued some NFT and then ended up buying it from herself under numerous fraudulent identities at some inflated price. And then I think eventually found some sucker to think it was a real transaction and then buy it at this market price that was established by wash trades. And there are estimates that even in Bitcoin, which is a pretty liquid asset, that 2/3 of the transactions are wash trades. And these are done by, like electronic trading firms where you're doing high frequency trading and you just want to move the price of Bitcoin a little bit. You generate a bunch of fraudulent transactions under fraudulent identities that appears to move the price. And then, these are things that get you thrown in the slammer if you try it on the commodities exchanges, because if you're trading commodities, you have to have a trader ID. That was one of the things we accomplished about the time of Dodd-Frank. And prior to that, the commodities trades were rife with, wash trades and all sorts of front running, you name it. And so that but if you offered that as an option for the NFT market, so you could say, okay, for this NFT, only authorized, KYC'd, known to market regulators, people will be able to own that NFT. Then you might see that the NFT market will be reborn because there'll be trust that you're not just looking at fraudulent things. So it's actually a pro-crypto thing to offer the option, which I often compare again with putting license plates on cars. If you just think for a moment how unacceptable automobiles would be, if you did not have the automobile license plate requirement, if you had unlicensed cars with unlicensed drivers driving through your neighborhood, driving across your borders, and this is sort of like crypto wallets without KYC. And so if you simply let people attach a KYC license, you don't have to know who they are, but you had to have that guarantee that if you got ripped off, that you could go to a judge and convince them that something illegal was done, that you could get that person de-anonymized and extradited if you need. That with that guarantee, then all of a sudden there'll be much more trust in crypto, and it'll make the North Koreans' job much more difficult to fund their nuclear program with stolen crypto.
We've got about 3 minutes left before our next session. Are there any questions from the audience? Oh, surely somebody's got something. All right. Well, if not, I always have more questions.
Okay.
So one thing I wanted to turn to, focusing on that Financial Services Committee. So last year at this event, we saw FinCEN formally announce their review of the 2021 Suspicious Activity Report. So they revealed, I think it was 42% of suspicious transactions totaling $212 billion were tied to some sort of compromised identity or authentication. Some of us, like me for starters, thought this might be such a jaw-dropping number that it would maybe prompt some of your colleagues on the Hill to start to focus on this issue. Maybe some of your colleagues on the subcommittee on House Financial Services looking at national security and illicit finance. They didn't even have a hearing on this topic. Now, I realize, wasn't under your control, but how do you think we get over the hump on this?
Well, I think one of the arguments that has a lot of leverage and salience these days is the business of financial competitiveness, which has leverage on both sides of the aisle. And when people start saying, if, for example, Europe rolls out a digital ID and they find out that the cost of onboarding customers and preventing fraud is just dropped dramatically because 95% of their customers are using a secure digital ID, then when banks that do business in Europe and the US come and say, look we are wasting this huge amount of money on KYC operations in the US. We are not wasting that money in Europe because they have a digital ID. It is making the US uncompetitive. That will get attention, and it will be the reality. I think, even a few years ago, I think it was McKinsey came out with a report that just looked at everything, and they estimated, 2% of GDP?
I think 3 or 4% in the US you could grow.
You could grow, yeah, a much higher number in places like, the developing world. But so that argument, I think, particularly when you can do the side-by-side comparison with countries that have a secure digital ID versus versus the United States, then that is an argument that may move the needle.
All right. Well, Congressman, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And
I appreciate listening. I get to sit there and read my email and do my programming. Yeah, those are what's on my screen there. I think that's my computer programming. I do a little computer programming to keep my brain from rotting and to be able to. And
Congress is that intellectually stimulating.
What? It is, yes. Well, my Christmas project was to upgrade my laptop to one that had a pretty good GPU in it, so I can run some of these AI models and stuff, which is very neat.
Excellent. Well, looking forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you so much for coming to join us.
Thank you.